In this lecture, we will be discussing monopoly. In the last lecture, we saw that how market failure can be because of monopoly power. Now, monopoly is a complete opposite to a perfectly competitive market. So first we'll try to define monopoly and try to see what makes monopoly very unique and why we study it. And then we'll also look into how a monopolist maximizes profit. Then in the next lecture, we'll be talking about how monopoly can lead to market inefficiencies. First, let's define monopoly. So monopoly is a firm in which there's only one sole seller. So that means if monopolist is a price maker, that means they can set the price whatever they want because the product they are selling has no close substitutes. A good example of monopoly in real world could be electricity company in your neighborhood, because you really don't have many choices, because there's often in many places there is only one electric company or gas company. A close to monopoly situation could also be, say, Amazon, right? Amazon is pretty much the only company which has huge online presence, though there are other companies, but nothing can compete with Amazon at this point of time. Or even in local communities, often big stores like Walmart can also be a monopoly depending on a situation. So monopoly can arise because of multiple reasons. So first, let's focus on why monopoly arises. First, there are barriers to entry. That means monopolies don't allow anybody to enter the market, and they will do anything to stop them from entering. Monopoly can also arise because of government regulations. What is government regulation? Government regulation means that the regulation is set in such a way that if only few players are there in the market. Third, there are monopoly over resources. For example, if a firm owns certain mines and they have complete monopoly over the production of certain mines, that can lead to monopoly. Or even patents can lead to monopoly. That's why often firms try to have patents so that nobody else can use it and they can charge very high prices. Monopoly can also arise because of production process. For example, let's say electric companies, because they lay all the lines, all the wires, so it's impossible for somebody else to enter the market because those wires or electric lines are owned by a particular company. Or in the case of cell phones, the spectrums are owned by certain companies, so that can lead to monopoly. And finally, there's a natural monopoly, which is a case where your cost keeps on decreasing as you have more buyers. A good example of natural monopoly is cable companies, because it doesn't matter how many people access the cable once the program is produced. So additional cost for accessing a program over cable is close to zero. So that means it's much more beneficial for cable companies to keep on adding more consumers once they start their services. So these are some of the broad reasons why monopolies exist. Next, we'll try to differentiate between monopoly and perfect competition. So monopoly is a price maker, whereas in a perfect competition, a producer is a price taker. So taker versus maker. That means in monopoly, a seller can set their price whatever they want to. In a monopoly, the seller is the sole producer. On the other hand, in perfect competition, seller is one of many producers, which makes a big difference, because under perfect competition, there are a lot of options for the consumers. As a result, they really don't have ability to set their price. And finally, under monopoly, they face a market demand curve, which is downward sloping. On the other hand, under perfect competition, a seller faces a demand curve which is horizontal. And this is a big difference, because why a perfect competitive market faces a horizontal demand? Because demand is perfectly elastic. Any change in price, if you try to increase the price, consumers will go somewhere else, which is not possible under monopoly, because there is only one seller of the product. You'll always find somebody who is willing to buy at a higher price, and that's why a monopolist try to sell at a or can set a price which is above the perfectly competitive price. Let's focus on the demand aspect. So in a perfectly competitive form, this is perfectly competitive demand. This is demand under monopoly. And you can see that demand curve under monopoly is downward sloping. Now this downward sloping demand curve creates a problem. Why? Because if you remember, a monopolist's revenue is nothing but price times quantity. Now since they face a downward sloping demand curve, let's draw the demand curve, price and quantity, and the monopolist face a demand curve which is downward sloping. Now if the price is set say at P1, that means your quantity would be Q1. Now if monopolist reduces the price to say P2, now the quantity would be Q2. And as a result, as you reduce price and you sell more, and revenue is price times quantity, so your revenue is going to vary depending on how much you sell. So under monopoly, a seller not only needs to determine price, but they also needs to determine quantity. On the other hand, perfect competition, price is given. You don't choose the price because the seller only takes the price which is already determined. So their price taker, only thing they need to choose is the quantity. So decision under monopoly is difficult because they need to determine both price and quantity together, which maximizes profit. Now our profit maximization condition under monopoly would remain the same, which is MR equal to MC, which is universal, which does not change. Irrespective of what kind of market it is, MR is always equal to MC. Based on MR equal to MC, a monopolist first chooses the quantity they want to produce, and as a result, they can charge a price based of their demand curve. And we'll try to understand that using a diagram. So under monopoly, you remember a couple of things. Demand is downward sloping under monopoly. We also know that demand is equal to average revenue, and recall it from the perfectly competitive market. I told you demand is the same thing as average revenue. So on the perfectly competitive market, we'll measure in cost and revenue here, and quantity on the horizontal axis. This is demand, which is also equal to average revenue. Now on the perfectly competitive market, your marginal revenue is always below average revenue. And if you remember from the revenue functions that we have done before, when average revenue declines, marginal revenue declines at a faster rate. That's another thing we did when we did the concepts of revenue. So your marginal revenue would be something like this, which is below average revenue. Now behavior of the cost functions remains exactly the same. So let's do our average cost. So your average cost would be something like this. That's your average cost. Or if and this, let's make it, this is marginal revenue. And let's now draw the marginal cost. We also the marginal cost cuts average cost at its minimum point. That's your marginal cost. So this is what the revenue or revenue cost and cost behavior that a monopolist faces. Now we all know profit is maximized at the point where this is your profit max point where MR equal to MC. Now at MR equal to MC, this firm is going to produce, let's say, Q1. Now if they are producing Q1, now what price to charge? Mind you, if they are producing Q1, price will be charged based on the demand curve, and demand curve is lying above. So in this case, price will be charged, and if you go up from here up to the demand curve, and if you, so that's your price the monopolist is going to charge, which is a high price. And again, how much in this case is the total revenue for the firm? Total revenue would be, let's name these things, we call it CO, we call it A. So in this case, total revenue would be OP1 times OQ1, which is area of P1O Q1A. This is the total revenue that the monopolist collects. How much profit they will be making? Again, we'll be figuring out for the average cost. If you remember, in this case, the average cost would be wherever the Q1, wherever it hits your average cost curve, that would be the average cost. Let's call it B, and let's call this point C. So total cost would be OB times OQ1, which is equal to area of BOQ1C, which essentially means that your profit would be total revenue minus total cost, which is equal to the area of P1BCA. So this rectangle P1BCA represents the profit of a monopolist. Now, how do we know that a monopolist is charging a higher price? That we'll do in our next lecture.